Welcome to episode 3 of the Radical Visions for Social Care podcast. In this episode, John will share the story of his early life, education and career. This was the third part of a much longer conversation, and you can hear Simon and I share our stories in episodes 1 and 2. You can also read blog versions of each episode on our website, radicalvisions.co.uk/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy. How far do you want to go back, John? Are you going to go back to
Who am I?
Who are you, childhood?
Yeah, so my parents were like yours, from the east end of Glasgow. One from Highkill, the other from Carntine. And they got married in 1950, bought a house in Rutherglen, and I was born in Rutherglen. And then very quickly we moved up as Glasgow overspilled to East Kilbride, the original new town. The first and obviously the best new town. That my earliest memories are from there. A bit like Simon, the church was always really important, right from my earliest memories, and my parents were involved in the local Baptist church. So John the Baptist is my kind of claim to fame. So yeah, that was a very positive thing in my life, and still is, and kind of filled me with lots of inspiration as well. I remember as a strange I think around about the age of 12, I remember being going in the car to church and thinking, oh, I'm really excited to go here, because the guy who was our minister, a guy called Peter Barber, but he was very stimulating and nourishing, both kind of intellectually as well as emotionally and spiritually. So, and my parents were really, they were sort of salt of the earth, and they both left school at 14. But they were the first generation after the war to really benefit, I think, from the NHS changes, the welfare state coming in. There was that whole kind of optimism after the war, I think, that they were part of. And so I inherited quite a lot from them in terms of my dad was always quite he would never have said I am a socialist, but he would have he knew he wasn't, he knew what he wasn't politically. And that all came from, he was one of 7 kids growing up in the 20s and 30s, and the conditions that people lived in. And then, thrown into work at the age of 14 and all of that. So he had a strong sense of justice and injustice, and, him particularly, he was he had no time. And I think that they were both kind of different from their parents, who were maybe a bit more traditional in their thinking about politics and power and all of that. I think that generation, they were. So I took a lot from that. I have a sister who's about 4 or 5 years younger than me. So I went through school into university, and I didn't really know what I wanted to be at all. And I ended up, I was never good at science at school. I get kind of chucked out of the science class by the end of second year, I would say. So when I went to university, it was an English degree, English literature, which I really enjoyed. 4 years of reading, and but I had no intention of being an English teacher.
What were you going to do, did you think?
I have no idea. No idea. And so you're getting closer to the end of the 4 years, and you think, well, I need to think of something. And I definitely don't want to be a teacher. And I'd met some people through the church and elsewhere who'd quite impressed me, who were social workers. And I had a bit of a kind of thing, sort of epiphany moment at one point in the university library. I remember thinking, maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to social work. So became a trainee social worker with Glasgow Corporation in its last year, and that became Strathclyde Regional Council. They
So
paid
what year was that then?
that was 74.
Wow.
74. So we were trainee for a year, and then, or a year or two, and then they sent you on they paid for your social work qualification training. So I went to Edinburgh University for that, and you had to. The deal was you had to go back and work for them,
right,
for a year. So it was a 1-year course with other courses you had to do alongside that, postgraduate, and then you went back and worked for the council.
As a social worker.
As a social worker. Now, that was quite a traumatic experience, thrown right in the deep end, an area team out in the east end of Glasgow, although the office was located in the city centre, but absolutely crazy kind of workloads. I remember my first day as a qualified worker, the senior social worker came in with this big pile of cases up to his chin, and he plopped them down on my desk, and there was 65.
That was yours?
65 cases. And there were mostly people on probation or with some relationship to the children's hearing system. Anyway, that's a whole other story.
So were you working as a generic
social worker? Yeah. And I kind of said, well, I'm quite interested in, without really having had any experience. My very first experience of people with a learning disability was during that trainee year, where they sent you out in placement. So I'd been right through my family life, school, primary school, secondary school, never really encountered a person with a disability, and certainly not a person with a learning disability. And I think the placement was described as a day centre for the mentally handicapped. I think that's what I was sent off to. And I think mentally handicapped, gosh, what's that? You know, it was as naive as that, and the connotations of it are not positive, you know, so you're going in thinking, what am I going to encounter here? And I remember coming out at the end of the first day thinking, you know, I've met some of the nicest people I will ever meet in my entire life. And I was kind of hooked from that point on. This is crazy, you know. There were these adult men and women were being told to put their, you know, to at lunchtime, once they'd had something to eat, they were being told to put their arms on the table and put their heads on their arms, have a wee snooze. And there's that whole kind of, it was like primary school or nursery school almost mentality towards them. So one of my placements as a student had been in Galashiels. So I kind of quickly got out of Glasgow and went to work as a generic social worker in Galashiels. I'd had a good experience there, and I'd had a good senior, and he was quite keen for me to come back. And
had you met Moira by this time?
I'd met Moira when I was, met Moira through church. She was friendly with my sister. So I knew Moira at that time, but I was off. I was away.
So you went with Moira?
No,
you went together?
No, we weren't together. So we're off.
Like to get the romance in there as well.
Yes. Go for it, Francis.
We're off into the wilds of the Borders, and I was a generic social worker in the Galashiels area team for a few years. So
did you leave home to do that then from
Muscovite?
Yeah. So you were living down there?
I lived in Selkirk at that point, for the first few years.
That was a big move as well.
Yeah. Because all through university, I mean, I'd just been living at home. So this is me sort of venturing forth. Yeah. And already 23, 24, whatever. So after a while in Gala, this vacancy arose for the social work position in the community learning disability team for the whole of the Borders, which at that time was located within Dingleton Hospital, which was a
really well known.
Yeah, had a big reputation. Psychiatric hospital,
a good reputation, therapeutic community.
Maxwell Jones was he'd left by the time I got there, but so we were a very small part of the psychiatric. There was one ward for people with learning disabilities, and then there were 3 community psychiatric teams, plus ours, we were the learning disability team. So that was a really good experience for the next few years, working with community nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, and really working as a team because of the ethos of that place. It wasn't hierarchical. Yeah, we had a few run-ins with each other, but there was a genuine spirit of
which must have been really unusual.
Oh yeah,
because within the
absolutely.
NHS, within hospitals, it's like really clear hierarchy with the made at that time.
Well, this was the kind of place where every day at 2:00, the whole anyone who worked there was invited along to a meeting, and you were kind of expected to go to the community council at 2:00, or if you're really keen,
way of running things, isn't it?
Really keen, you could be there for the 8:30. So there's that 8:30 meeting, and then there's a 2:00 meeting every day.
Right.
Certainly Monday to Friday.
I'd have never made the 8:30.
Not even then, no?
No. Well, that's not true. I was starting shift at 7 in the morning.
Yeah. So, so I was. So there wasn't an institution as such. The nearest institutions were Gogarburn and places like St Joseph's. And people would sometimes get sent away there. And there was this one ward for about 12 people, I think, in the hospital. But you were really working with people who lived in their own community. Around that time, I get exposed to PASS, which we should say is the Programme Analysis of Service Systems, written by Wolf Wolfensberger, and which was not being used as a tool, really, in the way that he designed it, but was being used to kind of educate people into thinking differently about what services were all about or should be about, and how they should value people in the face of a kind of systematic devaluation in society. So that was quite a eureka moment for me, going on that course for a week and coming back
me too,
with a kind of altered head around what I was doing and what I should be doing. And I started to meet through, as you do, you start to meet people in different parts of the UK who are doing.
You became a PASS trainer, did you not?
I did.
A facilitator, trainer?
Yeah.
So did that happen right away after that then, or?
Well, I suppose I get drawn into. There was a guy called Paul Williams, another guy called Alan Tyne, who headed up the training programs under that kind of Wolfensberger ethos, and so ended up doing some of those training courses in the Wirral, and that was a really good experience. That developed my confidence, I think, as a facilitator and a presenter, as did my work with Dennis Rowley, who was a colleague. He encouraged me quite a lot to kind of take more of a kind of leadership role around those. So practicing, speaking, presenting, talking about how we might do things differently. And that was I was quite self-conscious, much more than I am now. You can
see all the foundations being laid, though, can't you, in the story of who John is now, can't you, and what you're describing, particularly that working in that therapeutic community, and how a really good team works, because you're a bit of an expert in that, I would say now, helping people.
Aye. I mean, I kind of expect now that that's the way you should work. That's and so, going back into Strathclyde Regional Council later on was a bit of a shock, because I'm going back into that very hierarchical system in the 90s. Before I get there, though, I left the Borders. Maura and I had got engaged and we got married in 81, and Emma came along in 88, and we left the Borders in 88 and we went up to Stonehaven. And there was a new organisation being got off the ground by Grampian Regional Council and some other voluntary organisations to help people leave, principally the hospital out at Banff.
Did you know this?
No, I didn't know about Stonehaven at all, no.
So Yeah, this was Partnership Housing, which is now it's now under another name,
Aspire.
but Aspire, I think. Yeah. So I was the first employee of Partnership Housing in Aberdeen in '88, and
So was that a director's role?
chief executive.
Chief exec. So he never says these things.
No.
I was the first employee.
Well, it wasn't advertised as chief executive.
Well, but that's what you were, weren't you? So way back way back, what year was this?
88.
In 1988, John's off setting up a voluntary organisation up in where is it?
Grampian. Yeah.
So where do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
so that's the equivalent of kind of the Southwark Consortium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's right cutting edge for the UK.
Yeah.
Is that the organisation they were also part of, the Person-Centred Planning Consortium?
Yeah. Same organisation.
Yeah.
Alistair worked for them for many years.
Yes.
So the first few weeks it was just me. So I needed to start building up a team and start getting referrals. And Ladies Bridge Hospital at Bath was the biggest hospital in that area. But there was a place called Woodlands in Aberdeen as well. So we started, and we were doing, this was set up in such a way that the council, the regional council, would buy houses and lease them to our organisation on a long-term lease that was advantageous to them. So I spent a lot of time going about Aberdeen looking at really expensive houses. I mean, Aberdeen at the time was in the midst of the kind of oil boom, and that came.
Housing was a real issue.
It came to play a part for us later on, but so people were largely leaving in groups to go into really nice houses with very high ceilings and lots of space, but still a kind of group living and no notion of individualized funding or anything like that. And so that was 1988 till 92. That's why I know about the board and lodgings regulations changing in 93.
I remember.
Yeah, and there was a lot of pressure on round about then to speed up and get as many people out as possible. However, the mortgage, the interest rates for mortgage go way through the roof. I mean, we could barely afford to live where we were living. So, and around that time, I noticed an advertisement for the principal officer brackets learning disability for Strathclyde, which I applied for. I didn't really think I would get, but I did, and so we moved down to Glasgow, and as I said earlier,
were you up there then? I mean,
4 years,
88
to 92, and then, as I say, a bit of a culture shock going into that environment, regional council headquarters. So with like half the population of Scotland covered by our area, by Strathclyde, 4 different health boards you were working with, huge geographical area, and a whole infrastructure of local authorities, social work offices, and that's very. So I did what I could in that period. We had a big review of day services, which I was quite pleased about in terms of its content. Getting it implemented was really, getting the change into day services was really hard. But then there was the political move to wind up regional authorities, which meant that my job was, where were we all going to go? And I ended up going. I was sent out to Lennox Castle to head up. So it wasn't something I had particularly sought out.
You were sent.
I was sent, and
thank God.
I wasn't unhappy about it, but I thought, no, this would be a really. But you don't know what you're taking, but just as well, you don't know what you're getting yourself involved in. So Gina Hagan was already there. She'd been moved out earlier. She was part of the team that I had at headquarters, but she'd gone off to head up the commissioning team, and then I was sent out to. And
it must have been a big challenge and quite an exciting time, though, in a way.
Yeah.
But also, a bit like I was describing, a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
and
and I didn't know
negativity around you.
And obviously, by the time the three of us are meeting up, some of the resistance is becoming apparent. Sick for Sale was something kind of engineered by the staff at Lennox Castle in conjunction with a local MP. They had got that story into the paper. So then you realised you were dealing with something quite different. And I suppose what helped at that point was actually the Wolfensberger stuff, which can seem very strange and to people when they first encounter it. But I had learned back then that there was this systemic kind of discrimination against people. And so when it manifested itself in that way, I could kind of understand it. The experience was quite traumatic, but it helped. It was possible to get into some kind of perspective because of that, I think. So
what I remember is and this is a funny thing to say maybe, but in all of the dealings, because I mean we were like me coming along kind of talking about the early version of Inclusion Glasgow. Well, if we put it in this context, you can see that there are waves and waves of innovation, so it's quite natural, but it's also not. It was very challenging thing to want to do. It created more pressure. And then as we went through those first, couple of years together, all sorts of complexities and challenges. But I just really appreciated, like, when you would go and have a meeting with John, he wouldn't always say immediately that he would solve the problem or try and comfort you in any way. You would try and explain the problem. And then a solution did emerge. And so I have a very strong sense of like, here is a reliable man in a world that wasn't very often reliable, like, and not somebody who would just flannel, like the opposite of whatever that is, would just take seriously everything, would talk to people, would help move things along in an honest, open way. No bullshit, no spin. It was very, very, because I don't know, it was quite I suppose it's funny, isn't it? Like, so we had Jacob in 97, our son, and, so there's a lot of pressure and stress in these periods, aren't there, that we're putting ourselves through, all of us actually.
Yeah.
All basically had one child.
That's right.
All in the midst of enormous personal, social change. But, anyway, I mean, like Francis, he really rode to my rescue at Inclusion Glasgow in terms of the operational side of things. But having you there as the kind of foundation for it all and holding our hands as we pulled it off, which is what fundamentally we did, I think.
It was great for me as well to be able to be associated with something as part of that was at the more kind of radical end of things, the cutting edge, as you were saying earlier, Simon. Because I kind of knew by that time that we didn't just have to churn out group homes. And if we had more time and more money, we could have maybe done something differently. So it was heartening professionally for me to be able to see that. I'm just remembering as well, the other good thing, by the time I got to Lennox Castle, I'd met Peter Kinsella. All the ideas about separating housing from support were well ingrained in me as a really important principle. So even though it was group homes, we were a lot of what we did, we were still trying to set things up in the most sort of person-centered way that we knew how, within the limitations placed upon us, I think.
Peter is an important
yeah,
character in all of these things, really, isn't he? He's still there, but he's now in the restaurant business. But I mean, actually, his impact at that point in the early 90s can easily be underestimated.
It was fabulous. Yes, it was, and he's quite a different character. Just a different style. He'd been on a Harkness program as well, hadn't he?
Yeah. I met him when I was doing a study tour of Wisconsin in 92, and he was on a Harkness Fellowship based in Wisconsin. And that's really where he, looking at what they were doing, kind of formulated the basic principles of the supported living movement. And when he came back, he was still working in Liverpool, but he started to do this kind of consultancy project out of the NDT, which he then invited me to join, I think, the second half of 92. So that was my first experience of then operating in this kind of more national level. In fact, I think as part of that, I had a trip in 92 up to Scotland and went to places like the Fred Martin Project and things to talk about supported living. And I think that's when I met Andy Smith in 92 or 93, maybe.
That's right.
On a kind of a little trip around Scotland. Probably it would be 93, I think, because I was married to Nicola already at that point. Yeah, so those ideas started to percolate around Scotland from 93 onwards. I think we were saying, come on. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a kind of nice, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because sometimes it's very easy to confront all the resistances we've faced and the problems, but amidst this, there are these waves of progress, and where you do get to build on things that have, the better has started to become normal, or at least feel not weird, and then you can build on that. So
that's right, and you know that you've got allies elsewhere, but it's not just in your particular local environment. It might not feel that you've got many allies, but elsewhere in Scotland, elsewhere in the UK, there are people who share the values and share the.
Now we can say elsewhere in the world, can't we?
Yes, we can.
Our friends all around the world doing this stuff, and it's really weird to discover that Patty was doing exactly the same thing as Inclusion Glasgow, exactly the same time. We just didn't know. We just had the Atlantic between us.
Yeah.
I'm conscious, it's not my job to do it, that probably we've all told our story, and that's a long enough podcast for most people, I would think.
I would have thought so. We've got ourselves to February 96, is that right?
Yes.
15th, did you say?
Yeah, definitely. That's the key point as far as I like these dates. I write them down.
Yeah. That's a launching off point for the next one, I think. But thank you very much, Simon, for. And that was
thank you both. It's fantastic. It's fantastic to listen to. And we should know this stuff, shouldn't we?
We should know this, yeah. But
I think we know lots of it, but it's still interesting that you're still always learning wee bits of information. Do you know what I mean? And absolutely.
And some of these big changes are interesting. This isn't, but like the 1990 Community Care, it was the white paper, then the NHS and Community Care Act, the move from board and lodgings, the reorganisation of the local government in 1975. These are key events, actually, that have huge ripple effects, and
of course,
it's worth reflecting sometimes on what the system's done to us for good or ill.
Direct payments legislation, 96. So,
you pick that up, won't we?
We'll pick that up.
We'll definitely pick that one up. And we meet again. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
From Biggar to Sheffield, good afternoon.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Radical Visions for Social Care podcast. Don't forget to check out our website, radicalvisions.co.uk/podcast, where you can explore all our other episodes and read blogs about each episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Radical Visions, and you can email us too via info@radicalvisions.com. Thank you very much, and goodbye.